4 o'clock, yes.
The three of us in this group talking would be a quorum, so we couldn't do it.
Can't do that. It's a quorum of the committee. Okay, it's 4 o'clock, so we will begin this meeting of the Finance Committee of the Ojai Valley Sanitary District on April 3rd, 2025. We're all here. Do we have any comment written electronic?
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. Then for discussion and recommendation, item 3, the 25-26 fiscal year budget discussion. Take it away, staff.
You got it. Well, thanks for entertaining this meeting. So here, let's just go through it. There's an introduction here on the first page, quick executive summary, talking about what we're going to look at. We're going to look at line items, both revenue, expenses, specific expenses are highlighted. So I personally like to use the 80-20 rule in my life. And the 80-20 rule is a small fraction, about 20% of your effort really constitutes about 80% of your return, and sometimes flipped. So when you go through this, there's about 20% of the line items are highlighted yellow, and you will find out that they add up to 80% of the costs. So it's an easy way of looking at the big picture real quick.
They carry more weight.
They carry more weight, a lot more weight. I find that a lot in my life across the board. So anyway, we have costs. I have some highlights on some of the noted items. We get into a little bit what we're going to find is it weighs in on our balances, our reserves. We don't have a projection of what our balances are going to be at the beginning of the year. So the best I could readily use was the February balances. So I need everyone to understand that it's an earmark, it's a ballpark, it's not exact. And then we'll go in a little bit on discussion.
The February balances has the second round of property tax roll money then not come in yet?
That doesn't get deposited into reserve. So if you're referring to the reserve balances, the only things that would affect those is any posting of the interest monthly, and then any transfers in or out that the board approves on a monthly basis. Property tax money
Property tax money second half is in the book or not in the book?
It's not, and it will post on the balance sheet that specifically shows the category of funds at the county. That's not the balances that he's referring to. He's talking about reserve funds. And so the balance of the county is not accounted for in the actual reserve funds. It's in available cash. And so that's not the balance that he's referring to in the context he's talking about.
It's in available cash, not in the reserve fund.
That is correct.
Is it in what we're looking at today?
No, because these are not actual balances. These are projected expenditures and revenue. So we're not talking about current year. We're talking about anticipated deposits in totality, projected for next year. For various revenue.
July 1st forward.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
All right, so let's dive into it. Page 5, if you look down, there's a really small footer, number 5. It's the first table. Some highlights in here is we have actually a projection of slightly less than the previous year's tax rolls. Is in proposed or projected revenue of $7.36 million. Director Quillisi asked me why, and the answer is there's a couple different reasons. One of the reasons is we've been doing fixture unit counts on commercial properties, and we're seeing that there is a change in the Uniform Plumbing Code, and it's actually a slight decrease is what we're finding with a lot of our fixture unit counts. So as we
point counts on individual fixtures changed.
yes, and therefore so that's about what we're seeing is qualifying that 1%. There's that, and I suspect there may be well, I don't suspect, I know it's this is based on the actual number today. There's no projections in it, and so it's as we sit today. I don't know where the previous one was, but that's how it sits today. Allison?
So that's either 30-10 or 30-20.
Yeah, it'd be 30-10.
It,
Well, the direct
it'll be 30,
20 is all commercial, isn't it?
I know 3010 is going to be comprised of only our accounts that we direct bill because they don't get a tax bill. So those will be our mobile home parks, anything owned by a public entity that is exempt. Those are the things that get direct billed. Anything else that we can possibly put on tax roll is collected through the tax roll. Unless it's specified differently, like on, for example, 3040 is Casitas and 3050 is Pepsi, previously DFA. Those are counted for
Those
separate.
were direct billed, but they're separate from the other.
And because they're direct billed on a very specific, sort. They're either their revenue is separated out because they're a top user, or they're billed based on a specific usage. And so those are separated out. But our direct billed accounts are only going to be the things that cannot go on tax roll. So everything else will be billed on tax roll and should be reflected in 3010.
And these are based off of current rate as it sits now. It does not include, there's no
Include the proposed rate increase.
it doesn't include any proposed, there's no included, nothing is, it's just as it sits in there. Another highlight in here is the bank interest. So it would be 3410. That has increased significantly. I do have an update I can give on that. I reached out to, the district is a member of the California Special Districts Association. I reached out to their CFO after looking at our bank statements, realizing we were getting 0.05% interest. And I'm thinking there must be something better we can do.
The way banks work.
Yeah. And so I reached out to them, and he actually provided me two quotes. One was a quote where it was a bank that specializes for special districts, but it ties into LAIF. And it's seen LAIF Life. Is it LAIF Life? LAIF. It's
Full agency investment fund.
yeah. But it seems somewhat cumbersome to make that change, or to even consider that change. Another one was just another regional bank that was up out of Sacramento. And so we received a proposal from that. I called our local branch up here and said, hey, I got a pretty competitive bid from a bank in Sacramento that will do business with us. And what can you do? And they increased the rates on our savings account 60 times, from 0.05% to 3.5%. Yeah.
Because
So-
you rattled the cage.
Yeah, it was Bank of the Sierra.
The ones that we've been doing business with all this time.
That's right.
Just because we asked.
You have to ask.
We keep an average around $1 million in there.
Well, it's,
I really want to
yeah,
congratulate.
it's,
For the local
I
branch,
think it was a,
we're a big dog.
it was an easy thing to do, a simple thing to do.
Yeah.
In concept, it took some legwork to get it done, but you know, it's a $30,000 difference to us, to the district. And I just think it's wonderful they actually did it.
it could be as much as that. So zooming out a little bit, at the local branch,
Here it's 12,000.
well, yeah, it's 12,000, and that's where I was gonna go with it. So zooming out a little bit, we have 3 accounts at the local branch. We have one checking account that we use for minor deposits in and out online through some online stuff. And the reason it's so small is if there was ever a cyber attack, it's just a way of limiting our risk. The other one is an internal checking account that we cut checks out of. The other one is a savings account, which is the account that we would use before we transferred over to checking. So we would take money from, if we were to get it from tax rolls from the county, if we were to get it from PFM, it would.
It all falls into the savings account and then move it. Okay.
And this projection here, the 12,000 is in, I went back the last 12 months, and the last 12 months, we kept $345,000 in the savings account. We had about $900,000 in the checking account. That's our average daily fund. So anyhow, that 12,000, it would be the interest that you would get on that 345,000 average day deposit at the savings account.
Okay,
We're gonna,
and the account with the 900,000 is a checking account.
that
Pays
pays
still
zero.
zero interest.
Yeah, it is zero. It's a zero interest. And Alice and I are gonna work together and see what we can do to really, the intent is to fund that checking account only when needed. And it's a free transfer from the savings to the checking account. So there's
An instant transfer.
an instant transfer. That's right. An instant and free transfer.
Okay. And the county interest doubles.
The county interest, I think yes, we do have that projected to double.
And that's because
The balance that,
keeping twice as much money.
yeah, last year, because we had TMDL, our cash didn't sit there very long. So currently the county fund actually is where the majority of our liquid money sits. And it yields 4.58%. And so since we will be sort of assuming our normal spending, so barring the large TMDL payments or anything of that sort, I do anticipate a larger balance sitting there and us restoring back to some more normal sort of spending.
Well, if we're really going to fund the $6 million or whatever in capital projects, it may still turn out to be more like last year.
Well, it likely won't be coming from the money that's in the county. It'll likely be coming from PFM. Because the revenue that you receive from tax roll, which would be from the county, is almost equal to your operational expenses. So anything that you're funding for capital, you can probably presume is probably going to come from PFM.
We're funding the capital projects all out of current revenue,
It's,
service charge revenue.
I'll dive into it.
we'll have to dive into that.
We'll dive into it as we get through it.
Okay.
So there's what we're looking at for a grand total projected revenue is 10.957 million. Over on the expenses side, so page 6. Some of the highlights, regular wages for the office that has increased significantly. At this point, it's what it is. Retirement expenses going down to 4260. That is increased.
The more retirees you have, bigger 4260 gets, sure.
4640 health insurance expenditures. That's calculated based off of current conditions, correct?
Current employee pool.
Current employee pool. Post-retirement health, that is also increased. The 4645. Equipment maintenance, 5040. It's a large number, but it has not increased significantly percentage-wise. But it's highlighted.
I would have thought though, when we bought things like new gap vacs and new truck, maintenance for those things would go down.
Probably true, and I don't know exactly how the details worked into that estimate. I could look into that, but I don't know specifically.
What we did in this group anyway, would it? This is district management.
Well, that's equipment management office.
Yeah, that would be,
That's
so
all Yan's fault.
Here we go.
We need to go on.
I gotta put my glasses back on. Hold on a second.
I think it's both 5040, but also 5410.
Equipment maintenance office, then the 5040, that includes purchase of new servers and desktop machines and all that.
Yep.
All in maintenance, okay.
Excuse me, is
That's in
that number higher, man, because we're in a year where we had to replace a lot of the
Next year,
stations?
It fluctuates a little bit because of how the schedule lays out, and so.
that also includes all the software that.
Correct.
Software updates or new programs or.
Let's see, another big one here, 5430, that's the insurance. $50,000 increase this year.
Does that insure?
Our CSRMA insurance, so that's all of the district's insurance policies, non-employee related. So that would be flood, fire, workers' comp, general liability, property, crime, large vehicle.
Before 10 is where purchase of stuff goes.
Correct.
50 is just maintenance.
Like your software renewals and so on.
Okay, licenses and such. Okay.
5620, another big one, management, engineering, technical services, offices. That also is, correct me if I'm wrong, that is some software and some hardware, but it's applicable only to engineering services, Ian?
Correct.
And then legal services, 5640, we're expecting an increase on that this year.
Is that because we have more litigation?
Trevane won't go away.
Yeah.
It accounts for a consistent increase in having to respond to potential litigation.
Yeah, this response and the
It's not, the
communication.
actual cost of litigation is never really factored into this because that is like a one-off. And if you choose to be in true litigation, it'll be very expensive and that will be a whole separate conversation. But this is the increased responses to, supporting our OVSD 82 and such has gone up.
How much are we doing with, is it Nossaman?
Nossaman is currently working on our spill responses with us. And so Robert is working with staff anytime they need to
All the
write
environmental stuff.
communication or responses to the regional board. I believe he's actually working on another project area for you. It's non-spill related, right? Or is going to.
Yeah, minor one. He's assisting some.
Right, the ease. And we have some property easement agreements we need to alter. And he's looking at that as well.
But that's all in the 205.
So that's a summary of the expenses for district management on page 6. Over to page 7. Summary of the expenses for the collection system. Highlighted one, 4210 are wages.
We filled vacancies.
One vacancy, but it is accounted for in that number.
And this is assuming full
Correct.
staff, yeah.
4620,
This new person is gonna get 240,000 a year.
No, this,
And one more person.
this accounts for you, also the competitive salary adjustment that was made this year. And so that increased that number by presumably somewhere close to
So we
20%.
20%. Projected raise of 3.5. And then we have one more person included in this that's not here now. Is that?
That is correct.
No projected rate. This is expenses.
but there is
labor?
a projection.
Anticipated COLA of X amount
Yes.
with X.
3.5.
3.5. And then, but that will, when's the last that you can make the change on that to get it to match? Is it usually matches June over June?
We presume an amount and then whatever it ends up being June over June, we look at our budget and we're either fully funded to cover it if it's lower. If it's slightly higher, generally we can absorb that based on where we are, as long as there hasn't been anything, severely drawing down any of these funds. We're generally not that far off unless inflation runs wild, so.
And that's a summary for the collections on page 7.
You had lined one that was a zero change.
Oh, it's a zero change, but it's a big dollar amount. So it's just the line maintenance. It's what we spend on line maintenance. So,
See them out most every day,
yep.
either with a camera or pig or something.
All right, up on to page 8, treatment plant. Starting at the top, 4210, wages. Again, increase on that.
That's with
That would be current
vacancy, but it was a higher level vacancy.
level and a 3.5% increase for COLA and the already adopted rate increase, pay rate increase. Yep.
I would have thought because it's a full year pay increase. 24, 25, not a full year.
A lot of these are similar. The 4260 is similar. The 4640 is similar. We do have 5,005. That's the utilities down there. It's a big number. That's why it's highlighted. It's over $500,000.
How much are we benefiting from having that Tesla battery bank? I think when it was first put in, we're given an estimate that it was gonna save us somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 a year, I thought. But it doesn't show up these numbers.
Show up as a savings here. So the Tesla,
Show up in utilities expenses. Where else would it be?
so that most of that utilities expense is Edison. And we would estimate that our bill would be about 20% more without the Tesla battery.
Okay,
Probably.
where did that go in?
2020, 2020. Or,
That far back, okay.
yeah.
Okay, so
Time I got here, so that's about all.
We got that funded as a grant. It's free to us.
just dealing with Edison rates here.
Which can.
Our usage isn't gonna change a lot.
But do we need another battery system?
Well, that'll be the decision we have to make when this one's end of life approaches, which is in probably 5 to 15 years. Is we have to look at the numbers and see, is it worth it to make another multi-million-dollar investment? And what's the rate of on that?
No, out of, I think, a second
Uh,
time.
That would be at our cost. And so
Yeah.
we got this one for free. That's why it's here.
I know, but if it saves you money, it might be worth
Does
it.
the current,
our plant during peak hours right now.
Yeah, all by itself. We don't need a second one.
Yeah, it was sized for our plant
Okay,
to run it. Yeah.
so that's the answer. We wouldn't need a second one for the.
so
The real question will be when it reaches.
battery holds power for 24 hours of operation?
No, it shaves from 4 to 9. It slowly not trickle charges, but charges most of the rest of the day.
Well, 4 to 9, yeah, 4 to 9 is the high electricity.
Does it lose efficiency over time like car does?
Yeah, it has an algorithm that runs it. I don't have a Tesla, so.
Batteries degrade.
They don't hold as
The
much.
batteries do degrade over time, but we kind of switch between 30 and 90%, so we're not draining them to zero every time. And according to Tesla, they lose like 5 to 10%, but it wouldn't be enough to.
It's not 60 to 90 and get to where you can't drain it below 60.
We got them.
Infamous hysteresis. Okay,
All right, 50/20 is highlighted just as a large percentage number at the 118,000. That's the building and ground maintenance of the treatment plant. Equipment, very similar at 50/40.
building and grounds maintenance, does that include bringing biosolids out to the old Lake Palmer and then onto a truck?
This
Where do we find that? The biosolid handling, 50/60?
And that's projected to increase as we're no longer composting. So we're shutting down the composting. We're going to be shipping all the biosolids. That's the method that we're moving forward with.
And, yeah. It hurts me because my yard
Roses like it.
lusts after that biosolids.
Okay.
But are we talking about fear of PFAS liability at some point in the future that becomes retroactive? I mean, we've been giving biosolids to the public for years. So kind of feels like liability is already there. What goes into the decision other than that?
It is expensive. So for us to lay out the biosolids, till the biosolids, take in essence receipt of the customer who's then going to leave with the biosolids. Labor, it was expensive for us.
With like one full-time person that was just out there
Seasonally, yeah.
turning the material.
Our equipment has reached its useful life and needs replacement, and it's very expensive. I think there's some anticipation that regulatory requirements will inevitably shut down our operations. So it's sort of looking at reinvesting for what period of time before it's going to start costing us even more. We were already hauling off during the TMDL, so we sort of had shifted operationally to that, and just sort of
Because of the
decided
need for the
space.
buffer.
Yeah, and so we
Space.
just decided to stick with that as our new normal, once we sort of evaluated everything.
Process is much more complex. So where we used to have an operator that's spending half the year selling biosolids, now they're working to keep our denitrification filters running.
It's an all hands on deck sort of.
So we don't have the people to deal with biosolids. All we have to deal with now is moving them from the belt press out to the staging area.
Correct.
And then the people that haul it away provide their own labor to load their trucks.
We load. So we have our backhoe, and when they show up, we will load the truck. So if we were to go forward, my plan is at some point you would put in a hopper system and trucks would be self-loaded right from the press. You would have trucks that were loaded, whether it was either trailers that were loaded, trucks that are loaded, or roll-off bins that are loaded.
And they'd come farther into the plant for that.
Farther in the plant, but it would not require any of our staff. Ours would be nearly automated, would be hoppered, dropped in, and people would come and pick up and drive off. So they drop off an empty trailer or container, and they drive off with a full. That's the,
How much does a hopper cost?
I don't know, we didn't get the prices, did we, Liz? No.
We have to get into design because it'd be
Yeah.
a whole page of our conveyor system that goes out to where it drops in now. We just leave our little dump truck there. So it would be an investment. Certainly, but we're also reaching potentially end of life of that existing belt press system because it's been in the 90s upgrade. So we're kind of projecting having solids handling improvement project on the horizon anyhow. And
You can't escape replacing the belt press. You can escape is having somebody deal with the biosolids when they come out.
fully limit our pressing. Would also be a goal of that project.
It's automated.
Yeah, we could have it stored in the hopper, so you wouldn't need someone driving the dump truck out to the yard every hour for 5 hours on the weekends. But that's,
Years down the road.
yeah, this is several years.
Just in general, if somebody left a trailer, would you fill it in a weekend or would you fill it in half a weekend?
He had
Or
like,
does it take a week?
they probably get 3 trucks a week,
Yeah, I think, I
2
2 to 3.
trucks a week, large.
trucks a week. So
And you can't just leave a truck stationary. You need a hopper system because you can't, it's kind of like jello almost. Won't kind of cascade and fill the truck. It forms a pile. So you need multiple hoppers to dispense into a long bedded truck like that.
Sure.
So we'd need to change that system in order to make that.
It's not dry storage.
Exactly. Yeah. And the goal is to not have to have someone inch it forward every 15 or 30 minute, whatever time it is. The goal is to limit.
If somebody.
Labor. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm sort of dominating the questions here. If you have something, please jump in.
5080 outside laboratory analysis. It's highlighted as it's a big one.
And it's down a little bit.
It's down a little bit, and I have to go back and check with Bradshaw, but I believe it's down a little bit as Bradshaw and I went through the analysis and realized that we are not required to do an analysis every year for dicot. So when Dukes does their root abatement with their chemical root abatement, they use a dicot is how that, we are not mandated to analyze for that. I want to say that cost is around $10,000 a year. And so
Okay,
if I remember correctly, I asked for that to be removed.
so this is normal CPI rate increases minus $10,000.
Chemicals are highlighted for two reasons. One is it's expensive and it's gone up quite a bit. The cost on that is estimated based off micro C, our new TMDLs.
We're feeding two more.
Well, we're feeding at this point they used some micro C during starting in July. Is that when we
That's the
started?
second in oxide.
Yeah.
They have been doing that for years. And they first started dosing to the filters in July. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
And then, yeah, so we anticipate a greater volume of micro C.
Is there micro C going into the sand filters or just the oxidation dishes?
It goes in, well, I've been on the horn with the PhDs and everyone you can imagine this week. And we have more meetings scheduled on Monday.
It's like me, you know more and more about less and less.
Exactly. So the answer to your question, it is going into the anoxic zones of the ditches. Technically, it is going into the line before we go through. It goes in ahead of the sand filters, and so it can mix. We are
In the sand filters too,
bugs in the sand filters. Yes.
be fed.
They have to be fed, and it's kind of that's slightly off topic from here. Bottom line is we're finding out that we really need to maintain a specific ratio of oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus, and the whole phosphorus component was frankly new to Bradshaw and I, and part of the issue is he has a great phosphorus removal system in the oxidation ditch, which may be exacerbating some problems that we have.
Maybe working too well.
Yes.
Sand filters.
Correct. But we don't know. We're getting to that as we speak. So they did a bunch of analysis on phosphorus this week. Waiting for the PhDs to get back to us with their balance equations, and we're going to start anew on Monday.
But at least part of that is the fact that we have more sand filters than we used to.
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly it. See some highlighted. I may have gone through some of them. Let's see. 56. One item was if you go on to page 9, there's some notes. 4230. There was a noted increase in OVSD admin overtime. And if we look at our current, it doesn't show up in our charts, but the current is there's about $38,000 in the current. So that's one of the reasons that 4230
Fiscal year overtime.
current right now.
Is that through June or is that just through now?
That was last fiscal year. Wasn't that last fiscal year? What number did I pull? I can't remember which number I pulled for you.
I think it's
No, that'd be current, that would be current year.
Current full year projection,
The 38,029 is current year to date,
year to date. Okay, so 2/3 of the year.
correct?
Are we short a person?
We are. We gave up an allocation so that the
Sure.
for the treatment plan.
Oh, to the treatment. Oh. I thought one of the office people became the engineering tech.
Nope. One of the front office people became a treatment plant operator.
Culture shock.
Let's see, what else we have.
Trust Fund reimbursement account.
That is our entire retiree trust fund that we set up with CalPERS, we pre-funded. So we must fund our retiree health insurance benefits. And then we request reimbursement by June 30th of every year, but we do not receive the money until the next fiscal year. So we have to budget to fund it. And so it's a circular thing.
My recollection is that part of?
Yes.
We have more money in OPEB, in the OPEB account right now
Yes.
than we need by quite a bit.
Yes, it is super funded.
So we don't need to put anything more in, just reflected in current expenses.
Correct. Yes, we have to pre-fund it and then we do get reimbursed for it and it posts to revenue the next fiscal year for the prior fiscal year.
Okay. But that's an account we're never gonna drain.
That is correct. Theoretically, what they say. Hopefully. Not in our life, not in our life.
So unless the entire staff retires all at
Well,
once.
it's all calculated for that too. So I think even then it's still fine. Not in our lifetime at least. That's a good problem to have though.
First world problem.
Isn't it though?
I can't get Wi-Fi in every corner of my house.
Let's see, what else we have? 5025 was an allowance for the vehicle, that's in my contract. We talked about 5060 is the increase because of composting. 5210, OVS, we transitioned over to Centos for our AED and first aid as outside. So that was an increased cost associated with that. It also includes the cost that we have for updating our IIPP plan, safety plans. Talked about 5250, that was the micro C. 5410, about that with EN stuff. 5610, there was an increase on the per diem for
On us.
5620 management. I think we're going to be looking at some outside, some additional cost, QA, QC, and some advanced designs. I'd like to get some small projects on shelf design wise, and that's an increased cost to that. 6060, I just put it off there. It was a separate note that got cut off to the side. But that's in election years only, so it won't happen this year, but there would be a cost that would hit. So it's going to fluctuate from,
That's paying the county to put us on the ballot.
so it bounces back and forth. So it's, I was at $6,000 expense, so it's, 6,000, 6,000.
That was Dan's campaign fund.
I don't see 6060
I was wrong.
treatment plan.
I think it
funded that one.
6060 is,
Your admin.
it's under management, yeah.
traffic management, yeah.
I was just reading, Gov Code 1780. With the thought, it has to do with vacancy, with the thought that we may have a vacancy on the board. And or two. and requires either a special election appointment. Presumably, the appointment would have to be a resident of the district which the vacancy occurred.
That's correct.
Do you have any plans? I'm not saying that it's staff's job to keep track of Plan B for any individual director.
I don't have.
I wouldn't know where to start.
That's a
It's
question.
something that we ought to think about. I think it's possible one board member will leave.
Well, with Jack
It's just been-
having resigned from one of his water board,
Well, what I'm saying is we may have a board member that's leaving at the beginning of their new term.
yeah,
And we may have a board member that's leaving at the end of their term. And so in the one case, I think we should have an election to replace it since it's almost 4 years. In the other, it's a new election anyway. So, or an appointment, maybe because it's just a short before the term expires.
it's not a $5,000.
I don't know what it would be.
Because it's a one-off special.
I think appointment makes more sense in that case.
If we can find someone to appoint.
You know, it just needs to be publicized. And they'll step forward, sometimes more than one. That's how mine went when it was my turn. You guys get up there and talk about what they.
You arrived here by appointment the first time?
There was another person also. So we both spoke. And the board deliberated with us removed from the room.
Sure.
And when we came back, they had a 4-3 or whatever it would have been.
Couldn't have been 4-3 because there was a
I think
vacancy.
it was 4-2 my favor, so was appointed. And then the next election cycle came around, I had to run for election.
Right, page 10, yeah, page 10 is kind of how it's starting to roll together here for us. Top line, you got the expenses grand totals over the last, the projected year and the last previous years. Got the revenues below that. Well, net operation, net result of operation, right, is the difference. So if we were to have no rate increase right now, you would end up with plus $1.46 million. Of that, you have a couple of non-negotiable contributions that you must make. You have to make a 2016 debt issue payment to the reserve. That's $330,000 this year.
That not money that's already in the reserve fund?
There's money in the reserve fund, but the money that's in the reserve fund is prepayments for interest, taking it toward the end of it, which will expire in.
So this is 330,000 of principal.
Only.
Correct.
Are some of these 2016 debt issue bonds being cashed in?
No.
And I don't understand. I understand the reserve interest, which you would kind of predicate on everybody's going to hold their bond to maturity for working purposes. So you've got to pay interest every year. Or reserve fund for interest makes sense. Reserve fund sounds like issue payment. Is the 330,000 all interest?
It's your principal.
All principal.
Your principal.
Then why are we talking about? That's basically buying back 330,000.
Depositing it into your reserved, and then you'll take or the allocation of the interest for that year plus your principal, and you'll make your payment on your debt. So you're funding your funding which you'll draw to make your debt payment. Timber.
Okay. So it's a 30-year bond, so you're putting 1/30 of the principal in every year. What's an allocation for interest?
Interest was pre-funded, so that's what's in there. The payment schedule that was set up was to contribute to the reserve, the principal, and then take from the reserve the interest for that year. And then we pay US Bank in September of every year for that annual payment. The combination of the two.
Okay. Forgive me, still don't understand. 330,000 is not all interest, you said.
It's principal.
Okay, so there's 1/30th or 1/20th or whatever, depending on the length of the bond. That is part of that. And then the rest is the allocation for interest against the totality of the bond issue.
That's refunded.
It was,
Say again, pre-funded.
District took the money and put it into the reserve fund for all of the interest payments.
For the 20 years or 30 years or whatever.
Correct.
That's the balance forward into the new reserve fund.
That is correct.
That number would go down every year.
it would help if we knew what's in those reserves now.
Roughly, I think $1 million.
330 to something. Is it in this table, the following?
It's in the balance sheet.
Yeah, we've been in the balance sheet.
It's not clear to me which one.
That's
2016 already has $1 million.
It has it on the next, well, on the
page 11.
page 11 has it on it, so it's the 5.7.
2016 has $1.6 million roughly in the reserve already. SRF internal goes to which fund? Which reserve fund is that?
It's an internal loan. So we used our own money to pay off a state revolving loan years ago. And so this is replenishing the fund in which you guys took it from.
It's not, there's no
The fund,
balance in that reserve
No, it's an internal.
Zero.
loan.
table.
you said this is replenishing, but what is it replenishing?
I think it was taken from the treatment plant replacement reserve, if I remember correctly. It was years and years and years ago.
So the SRF money is going back into the
Replenish what was
treatment
borrowed.
plant replacement
That is
reserve.
correct. It was the replacement.
Also, you don't see the treatment plant expansion. There it is, treatment plant expansion, millions now. There is no collection system expansion.
It's a trunk.
That's paid for by the new ratepayers.
Yeah, those ones, we don't call them expansion funds. They're called capacity funds. Because we're not really expanding you would be addressing capacity in the collection system. So they're similar funds, but they are named something different because they essentially address a different issue.
I recall some years ago now, there was a parcel owner north side of Yama County, between Del Norte and Five Points. Paid up front $50,000 for a 500-foot extension main line down to 5 Point.
We 5 years ago, we did a low pressure force main extension.
Yeah, but that wasn't.
That
on
was
the-
privately funded because it was to serve.
Had to have been before that. Like my first year on the board or something. That's not anything that we're talking about with collection system replacement reserve or
Yeah.
anything else. That's the expansion. Okay.
And then there's two payments that are defined by resolution that ought to be made out of that 1.46 million. That is the equipment replacement reserve. That's the IT. There's a series of resolutions that discuss that. That 150,000 in it this year, I think if you were to add it all up, it comes to 101 and a quarter, but next year is 203. And so that 150 line item on there is just simply those two cut in half. Split either way. So that's what we're looking at. The other line item is the vehicle replacement at 202,000. We talked about 200, but it was also, there was the
Adjusted for inflation.
Adjusted for inflation, yeah. So what that means is by rule, whether it is non-negotiable debt payment of the debt or this SRF or by resolutions, we owe 1.182 million from the 1.46 that you could generate without a rate increase, you would owe 1.182 million into the payment of funds right there. So that would leave you $278,000 left over. So any work we're talking about,
Would be put into any one of the reserves
it could be put into any one of the reserves, yes.
and then spent as necessary. Sure.
Spent as necessary. That's exactly right.
Can I go back to the question you were asking? Putting 330 into the 2016 debt issue payment reserve. Right now, there's 1.57 million in there. So we're putting money in to increase that amount. We're putting money in to offset something we're going to pay out. Or are we issued that debt? Did we have something that required us to fund it at that level every year? Why exactly are we doing it? That one debt issue.
We've looked, the answer is both Alice and I have looked at it separately and we've kind of come to very similar circumstance or similar conclusions where I think the intent was to prepay the interest so that when you got down toward the end, you're not burdening the district with an interest payment.
That's not a bullet loan. I understand that.
Yeah.
Also, I'll bet when the interest was prepaid to establish that reserve, that the interest rates that we've experienced over the last 3 or 4 years were not anticipated.
I don't know.
But that doesn't
Yeah, that
matter.
fluctuates.
Yeah, it doesn't
That
look.
doesn't matter.
I-
There's an interest rate on the bond.
Yes.
Exactly.
And there-
So that should be all principal going in there. Because the interest is already in there.
That's correct. And so since neither one of us were here when this happened and it was quite some time ago and there was a refinance in between and so on and so forth. When I manually calculate the balance in there based on the interest payments, it is very, very close to the total sum of the remaining interest. Whether the district had extra revenue at the time or whether it was a requirement of that bond to mitigate like a debt ratio, and that's how they chose to do that, I don't know. But it is very clearly refunded interest. And every payment schedule that I've seen and every budgeting strategy since that debt was taken out, since the refinance in 2016, clearly has annual funding of principal only. That is my best determination of what had occurred.
So the 330 is principal only.
That's correct.
Because I think our payment this is 392, right?
What?
I think it's 392. I think is our, right. So of the 392,
330 is covered by this transfer.
330 is covered by this transfer and the remainder is going to come out of the 1.57 million that's already been prepaid.
There's no, we don't need to talk about that. I'm just curious why don't we just don't pay it off and be done with it? But that's.
And what I told Scott is that as we get towards the last probably 3 or so years, and reconcile a little bit better as to what interest is remaining and then adjust our contributions accordingly to hopefully zero that out as close as possible. We're way too far to even make adjustments. Would not be my advice at this time.
How far out is it?
2037.
This was a long one, huh? 30 years? 20 years.
It was 20. So this 330 is 5% of the face value of the bonds. 20th of the face value of the bonds.
One's in there is dangerous.
That was like 6.5 million bond issue.
That's a refund.
That was a refund.
2003.
It's more than that original.
Yeah, because it was consolidated too, but I think that's about what's.
So what was this 392,000 I just heard?
Was the interest we actually pay versus what the 330 that we're putting into the account
Principal and
330 is not for interest.
to cover that 392.
392 is the annual bond payment. So there's a 392,000 will be our bond payment this year. That 333 of it is going to be the principal.
Part of the budget and the rest comes from.
We show the payment schedule in the actual budget, so that everyone can see the principal. And
Has anybody cashed in their 2016 bonds?
I don't know.
I'm trying to, my head wrapped around. Why is there an extra 60,000? You said that the annual payment, 392,000.
This year's payment,
All, well, let's just
this year's payment is 392.
say it's a number. Okay. That's all interest that's being paid. If it's not, if any part of it is principal, then somebody's cashing in a bond. And so the bank that is custodian of the bonds is simply telling us this is what we need to pay this year.
Yes.
So there's interest on some amount of the debt, and there's principal gurging principal. And the bank just gives us a number and
We have a bond payment.
in there, put it in that reserve fund.
Yes. We have a schedule of payments that we have. And that schedule of payments has matched the payments that have gone into the reserve fund. Reciprocal money that gets left over, run the projection, looks as if it runs out the end. Am I correct, Allison?
plus or minus, yes.
Happy to look into it more.
I think to answer your question, you have to have a statement from the bank that lists, your payment is this, of that, this is.
Consisting of X amount of interest and Y amount of principal.
If somebody's cashed in their bond, which maybe there has, maybe there hasn't, but. Finally figured out.
How did we come up with 330,000? What was the decision process to get to that number put into the reserve?
Versus 392, for instance.
Or any particular number?
The 392 is the payment this year. The 330 was the listed it's listed as
That's
the
the 5% of the bond value.
it's the principal that this year.
If the payment is actually 60,000 more, somebody's cashing in bonds. The other 60,000 must be interest, principal recapture by bondholders.
Well,
I don't know what else it could be.
I think it's a good question.
I will follow up on that.
You understand, I have complete trust in all of the things that you're writing down here.
It's nice to know why.
It doesn't make sense right now.
Yeah, it's nice to know why we're doing it, especially when it's listed as non-negotiable. Okay, how'd you get the number? That's a very valid question. We don't know. That's what I'm hearing.
Tell me again, the essence.
It's what we've been doing for several years. We just did it again.
The SRF internal. Tell me about that. May have missed a few of the first 5 words or less.
The district took an SRF loan in some odd years back. They used their own funds to pay that debt.
Who
And
they?
they, as in the district, used their own reserve funds to pay that. And they created a internal repayment agreement to refund that reserve at the rate of $500,000 a year until said amount was paid off. So that pays off in maybe 5 or 7 more years to pay that off.
District money from the SRF or
Uh-huh.
not?
Yes, the district took an SRF loan, so a state revolving loan.
Okay,
They decided to pay off the loan early with their own funds. So when their revenue allowed that, they essentially took from the
Oh.
reserve they weren't using,
Saved a lot of.
paid it off to
Okay.
save money on interest, and then
Sure.
subsequently paid themselves back for this payment agreement.
so it's like an escrow.
They're basically repaying their debt to themselves.
Okay.
And the equipment, for that, you just described, Allison, I think I understood it. There's the reserve number listed. Page 11. Covers that SRF.
There isn't a reserve fund for it. This is going to be deposited into a reserve fund. So this will be deposited into your treatment plant replacement reserve.
I see, okay, it goes in there
So
automatically.
essentially, you're repaying your own internal debt by
It
collecting.
doesn't show up as a separate fund.
No, it does not.
I got it now, thank you.
Okay, so you would expect that fund to go up by $500,000 next year.
And I will double check that that is the fund it came from. It was one of the treatment plant funds, and I have reason to believe that that would have been the most appropriate place to borrow from. Based on
It
how
was the biggest and
the
prob-
volume in which it is funded, so would be available to do that would be very likely that particular fund.
So really, with that in mind, you have listed here that's going to various funds that we could use next year is 852,000, right? It's the 278. All that money's going into various funds. We're just calling it non-discretionary or whatever, but or defined by resolution, but it's going into a fund that could be.
It's going into a fund that could be used. I see.
If we,
You are correct.
we came into some horrible thing happening, we could transfer these funds to one of the other
So that's like $1.1 million.
who needed it.
Total's about $1.1 million.
Well, no, but the 330 is something that's tied to it. We can use that money.
Well, I'm
Will
looking at the other three. SRF, equipment replacement, vehicle replacement,
and the
and
plus the
discretionary.
plus the 278.
Yeah, so that comes to about $1.1 million.
Okay, I was looking at the 1182, thinking that was what you were quoting. No. Yeah, so we're basically putting $1.1 million in this budget as it's done up here into various funds that we
Various reserve, yeah.
various reserves we could use if there was some emergency.
Um,
Required transfers between reserve funds.
For sure, perhaps in part. You have some of these that are fenced by actual requirement, and so they are non-discretionary, so that whether you could transfer or you would borrow from them in some formal way, that would be, you'd have to review that with legal counsel. Some of them have encumbrances earmarked as part of the budget, so obviously like a debt payment, you wouldn't move that around, wouldn't be able to make your debt payment, that sort of thing. So I like to say that really the only fund in which is discretionary of any of those reserves is your contingency and stabilization fund. Any of those other ones would require some sort of resolution or internal loan potentially or something. If you had to leverage them, you would have to get a little bit fancy with that.
Yeah, I'm just saying if there was some absolute disaster where we needed a whole bunch of money, those problems could be worked. Get it where it needed to be if for some reason we absolutely had to have it, but just thinking of worst case, so. See, what I was gonna suggest too is, it's a vehicle replacement, for instance, we said 200,000 unless there's some issue with the budget, so whether we put it in vehicle or whether we put it in treatment plant, you know, it's still money that's accessible if we have an emergency. So it's not really, and it's where we're putting it, and that's where we want it to go. If we had to have it, we could get at it. So
Because the ones that are in red are non-discretionary reserve funds.
page 11.
Page 11. Those are funds that are required to have by law.
Right.
But how far does the law go? For example, if you put money into the treatment plant expansion fund, reserve fund, are there restrictions on what we can spend that money on?
Your treatment plant expansion reserve is actually funded by capacity charges. The treatment plant replacement reserve is funded by
Okay.
transfers.
Okay, let's talk about the replacement reserve then. Are there legal restrictions on what we can spend that money on?
Kind of. So if you go to resolution OVSD resolution 218-12, treatment plant defines that the treatment plant replacement reserve goal is to guarantee perpetual replacement of major water treatment plant facilities when each facility reached the end of its respectful service life.
Okay,
So as long as it was in concert with that, you could use that money.
so we have set our own rules on what that currently 4.039 million
Correct. And
can be spent on.
I think it would probably be worth a review from me and legal counsel, and perhaps even, the finance committee to go through and see what other requirements are in here. For instance, you hop in and you look at OVSD 70, OVSD 82, resolution 218-12. Talks about the treatment plant expansion reserve goal is to fund modification improvements to water treatment plant.
So that's where the TDML would have come from. Sure.
So
Here's what I'm getting at. It goes to this question he asked down below. How much money do you really need for emergency? Seen in the past, a peak year of $5.3 million. So presumably that disaster occurred in our collection system, right? With the washouts.
Yep.
So if we had another $5 million washout, there's not enough money in the collection system to pay for that. So if we were going to pay for that with the reserve that we have,
What could we pay for it with?
we have to be able to move it. And in spite of the intent of creating those funds, there is probably a mechanism where we could move it from where it is to where we need it if we had to. So all I'm getting at is I've got no problem with these funds the way they're set up. It's this philosophical question down below, and I jumped ahead, I'm sorry, but we try to
That's
figure
where
out.
we're going ultimately.
Yeah, I'm happy with the budget as proposed, but it does beg the question, as Scott writes here, how much should we really have? Because when we started this process at the last full board meeting, that number was another $4 million above what's proposed now on these pages. So,
So number was $4 million above.
you met the transfer amount. The transfer total was going to be
okay.
4.5 million, something like that. And now in this
This
budget,
transfer amount here assumes no rate increase.
right, and so he's got a transfer of 1182, and that leaves us 278 that we can move to whatever fund we want to put it in. But, and so that's the question, is that okay if we live with this 6.5 that's going to result after our capital projects this year? Or we think we need more than the 3% raise that he's proposing? I'm comfortable with 3%. I'm comfortable with the numbers that we have in our reserves. Mainly because of the FEMA money. we didn't have that out there, and there's some chance we won't get, some chance we'll only get a part of it or none of it, but, you know, the only reason I'm comfortable with our reserve right now is because that money is theoretically owed to us. If we ever get it or not, it's not a question, but
Sure.
anyway, and then with the idea that, you know, in future years, if we go another year and don't get it, then I think we're gonna have a fairly healthy increase for our reserves, you know, next year. Over the next fiscal year, we don't see any of that FEMA money. But that's why I'm comfortable with the budget the way he's got it proposed. And the other thing I think we should bear in mind in terms of, you know, transfers, right now there's some non-discretionary stuff, there's some, could be there, could be this, but in the end, you know, it's 278. So it's likely we're gonna have an under expenditure this year, just like we've had the last three of 300 or 400,000. So there's another potential of
Well,
300 or 400,000.
expenditures,
It always gets transferred to a reserve account. We do that every year at the end of the year.
yeah, the past years though, well, there was under expenditure, but there was also 300 or 400,000 typically. I think, that were increased revenue due to the Pepsi plant.
Well, but that's fine. But if you go through the charts and graphs of where we are right now, it looks like we're going to be underspent by three or 400,000. I just using 300 for my own. This, but you know, maybe less, maybe more, but
A lot of that under expenditure has to do with vacancies and staffing as well. So that won't be the case next year if we fill our vacancies by the beginning of the
Sure.
fiscal year. So we need,
I'm just saying it for the transfer at the end of this year. We're saying we're only going to put 278 in next year. Reality is it's 278 next year plus 300 to 400,000 at the end of this year. So it doesn't slightly better. Then you add the 228,000 coming in on the, you know, with the 3% rate increase. You know, and so we end up roughly potentially instead of 6.5, we're closer to 7. And we have the FEMA money floating around. So again, I'm comfortable with the way it is and the proposed rate increase. Unusual for me, but
The other unknown too, is there, whether we will or will not have a fine associated with, right? So there's the release on the, I don't know.
The fine was talking about January 2023. Now, January 2024, we also did a lot of work in Ventura Riverbed nearby. That's not something that we have approached FEMA for, is that right?
So in January of 2024, we had an emergency response project due to the high event that happened that year. That was in Foster Park. I think it was actually early February maybe. And that was about $180,000. We have submitted under a separate disaster. We requested reimbursement for, we've not heard about it. We reached out to FEMA and Cal OES about monthly.
So is that 180,000 part of the 3.9 billion still pending you? Top of that,
Oh, it's on top of that. So it's 4.1.
okay?
see, the other thing I was thinking when I was looking at this, the disasters that we had, river, and were due to the extreme rains that we had for 2 years in a row. And it's more typical for this area to have a bad year, a rainy year.
The extreme rain, we had the first of the 2 years.
It's more typical to have a rainy year and then 3 or 4 years drought like we're in right now. And so if we have another disaster, it seems to me it's most likely going to be in the collection system, not the plant. And the collection system, it's likely for the next 3 or 4 years, if we go into a normal weather cycle, that we won't have a collection system flood disaster like we did. Which, you know, it's just weighing how likely is it, in my mind, we're gonna need disaster money.
On the weather is a tough one.
Well, it is and it isn't. You know, we've got pretty clear cycles here. the years I've been here since 98, it's just, you know, it's every 4 or 5 years you have a bad year and then you're good for a couple, you know. So. But things are changing.
Back to another question as well. Of the, I'm on page 11. Looking at the cash app there are 3 of those are in red. Are they in red because of state law? Are they in red because of board resolutions?
The deferred compensation does not belong to the district. It's not in the possession of the district. It belongs to the employees. It's really on here out of a disclosure, but this is non-union. We don't have access to them. We're not holding them. Those are with Voya on behalf of and or weekend previous retirement holders. So I think
You're not paying that? CalPERS and Voya are
yeah, we
paying?
send the money to them, and that is the balance of all the employees' retirement funds that they have contributed.
So somebody else is holding that money.
Distributes it and everything, yeah.
Yeah, that deferred compensation is, it's not OVSD's. OVSD is a trustee on behalf of it's being trusted to.
Trustee on behalf of the employees. I'm
And why it's read,
required that we do this through CalPERS and Voya. 3.5% per year, well, $4 million fund seems like a good thing to have. I'm just wondering what wiggle room we have to dispense with having someone else do that. What are the pluses and minuses? Clearly, the plus might be 3.5% of $4 million, which is over 100,000.
But do you think if
But then there's the downside of it is we have to start writing checks every month. It's at least part of the downside.
Amongst several other things.
Okay.
Manage loans, they manage all, plan changes, all overages for health insurance costs come out of disbursements from, all sorts of things come out of there. They manage each individual employee's fund. And so that would be a whole separate thing. And they've tasked Voya with being the holder of those particular funds. But it is, yes, it is through CalPERS. I'm actually not aware of any district that doesn't go through the CalPERS administrator.
And even if there's 4 million in there and it was earning interest, probably don't have access to that because it's the employee's money.
Correct.
That interest would go to the employees. It doesn't come to the district.
The employees get whatever the employees get. The interest, the 100,000 or actually more than that, it's 25 or 50,000 goes back into that fund. Right?
These are 457s, which is like our 401k. So we're investing at varied risk and the returns on that are ours. It's our money we take out of our paycheck. So someone might put in 0 and someone might put in 1,000 a month. We each have our own account managed. It's like Lincoln Financial Group does for a lot of people, or I don't know.
457 is Ojai City Clerk, so.
Yeah.
I understand that part.
I don't know what it's actually doing on the sheet.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it must have to.
Using,
I can tell you, the reason I put it on the sheet is so it matches the financial analysis that comes out every month, because I didn't want to take it out because everyone's like, well, what's going on? We were at 15 million. So the reason I put it on there was for full disclosure. The reason it's highlighted red is the exact same reason it's highlighted red in the monthly financials, is because it's discretionary. The reason it has the footnote 1 next to it is because it's not the districts. And so if you take footnote 1, which is not the districts, if you really take away
Footnotes, by the way.
or maybe they're off to the side. It's not really a footnote. It's a note that's on the side on page 11. 1, restricted cash, Voya and Lincoln. Note 2 is next to the 2003 bond reserve. That's a reserve that at some point, it will likely be come back into contingency and stabilization. I'm guessing, Allison and I are guessing that it's going to happen in 25. And then you have the 2016 debt issue payment, right? When we already talked about that, that's the interest.
Yeah.
Of that 15.4 million that we would normally see on our, excuse me, on our financial, really only 9.7 of that is the districts. To do what they, to do anything with. The other, the Voya is not yours. The 145 for the 2003 bond payment, that will get remedied.
There's still 2003 bonds out there?
No, the last payment.
And they're all in the 2016.
They were accounted for separately because the 2003 was parcel specific in region. So they were assessed at a different rate depending on what geographic area they were assigned in our jurisdiction.
Like City of Ojai when the
Correct.
state was taken.
So those had to be accounted for separately because they were levied separately. That final bond payment was made in September of this year. So that will be reconciled when we reconcile this fiscal year's budget. Part of the reconciliation will be the recommendation to close out that particular reserve as being satisfied, with a likely recommendation to move that balance to the contingency and stabilization as the most
That's what,
universally sort of accessible fund for all ratepayers. And so that will likely be the recommendation as part of the reconciliation, but I don't do that until October every year-ish.
okay. And I recall reading somewhere, I think somewhere in here, that the 3.1% rate increase would amount to between $200,000-$300,000.
Yeah, I think I have it. I think my estimate is it's about 228,000.
I saw a number in there somewhere.
Ish $1,000 per 1%.
I'm sorry.
It's about 92,000 per 1% is what it ends up being.
Yeah. And it amounts to a couple of dollars a month. Any ratepayer.
It'll cost you about 13 grand to do a Prop 218.
Back 228,000 or so. The 13 grand is just for notifications. You have to file something with the county,
It's your required,
state.
your required publication period, and then your required mailings, and the cost of postage and processing ends up being about $12,000 or $13,000.
Okay. I'm curious, looking ahead to 26, 27. Are you trying to establish informal policy of service charge increases paralleling the CPI? It seems to me the CC height is a little higher than the CPI. The fact that you picked the lower of the two ratepayers, but is that the direction trying to head?
I think a lot of our costs are tied to the CCI construction costs. And so the answer to the question is yes. If projects need to be funded by the ratepayers, then it needs to be tied to any escalation in costs that we think is going to occur. Now that can change over the course of years. There has been times, if you look at the charts, there's times when the CCI has run less than CPI. Why it changed?
The amount of construction was probably down that year.
Yeah, right. And that probably is not where we're at right now with the fires in LA. I don't know. It's if I had to guess, construction costs in California are not going to be less expensive than the CPI for the next 3 or 4 years. That's my gut feeling. And and I do think in my statement in here, and I do hold true that it's two things. I have, I don't think we can weather not having, if inflation is running next to nothing, to ask your question, is it even worth your time and effort to go and do a 218 to have a rate increase? At that point, you're just paying for post office. But when inflation is running at 3.1%, that's not nothing. And if you miss a year, you're really going to get behind, and that's going to put you in a jam. So I think we need to understand that there's a prudence there that if you get behind inflation, it's just going to get. The other one is just I truly mean it is it's a philosophical question for the board is how much should we have in reserves? I'm happy to manage it. I think at this point we have a data point that shows that we need $5.65 million in adjusted for inflation to 2025 in reserves, and I don't have a backup plan right now. I mean, that's on my to-do list to do is that if something were to come down the pipe, how are you going to pay for it? How am I going to, how is the district going to pay for the contractor? If you had it in reserves, you work with the board and take an internal loan and you pay for it. But if the catastrophe comes in at 7 million, I don't have that answer yet. And so that's something that I'm working forward to.
I'd rather have you work on not having a catastrophe.
Well, that's what I'm going to. Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, I'm with you. But it's, when you,
We know our lines.
acts of God, it's, and
I'm teasing.
those are the big deltas and big changes.
If the assets, you called out 9.7. We had another disaster like 23. Would keep us from doing almost anything else.
Yes.
You're talking 5+ out of 9+.
Yeah, and some of these things are so fenced, I don't know that you would even. Right, some of the line items are so fenced, you may not be able to get it to go where you want it to go to either. I don't know.
Yeah. We're kind of. And the only reason I'm not that worried about it is because of the typical weather pattern and the FEMA money. But if neither of those, if the FEMA doesn't come in this year, then I think we're looking at 10% next year as a raise. It's just, we've got to build up that reserve for the eventuality. Like right now, the way it's got it is if the FEMA comes in, it offsets our capital projects this year. 1.1 versus 3.9. So
But the capital projects,
we'd end up at the end of next year, we'd be at the same place we are now if the FEMA comes in. But if it doesn't,
Fine.
yeah, and with no fine, yeah. What's a fine likely to be? Not talking millions, are we? Millions? That's that problem? We need to fire the state. People in fine, that's ridiculous. Is that a FEMA fine or a Fed fine or a state? State fine would be millions of dollars. That's useful. Let's just tell them we'll
the
close.
state is in worse financial shape than we are.
They're pretty responsible.
So if they can claw back
Like that for
millions of dollars anywhere. We call it FEMA, but
That's federal. This is state.
Right.
What's the spill and what's the reimbursement for the construction costs incurred during the disaster?
Yeah, reimbursement. And I do want to, maybe I wasn't completely crystal clear in here. It was a minimum of 3.1% was my recommendation. It wasn't a 3.1%.
That
We
word.
did miss that, yeah. So I just wanted to clarify. Yeah, I needed.
selective hearing, selective visualization.
The 5.3 million that we've already put out partly was to be reimbursed by FEMA and partly by Cal OES. Think we put in claims both places.
Covered 1.1 roughly, right?
And I think we're looking at the 3.9 would be one.
That's just FEMA. And then LOES would be another 800. But we don't necessarily expect to get that full reimbursement. And I spoke with Cal OES earlier this week, and obligation, they estimate is 6 to 9 months from obligation you'll get paid back. For us, historically, it's taken us
Been 2 years.
8 months, and they said it went up to 13 months. So it'll be that same fiscal year. It probably won't be the same fiscal year that you get it obligated.
Okay, but that was when 13 months from when the claim comes in.
13 months from obligation.
Is when they do their final review
Oh.
and approve your
From-
amount. So we only have one obligated project currently, right? One?
We've had 5 obligated, 2 of which have been paid out, 3 of which have not been paid out.
They've been obligated.
Yeah. They were obligated in October.
Boy, they're operating differently from my experience.
Well, I mean, look at the number of disasters and
Yeah,
how much there is to give. I mean, it's exactly what you'd expect it to be right now, I think.
Ours is small potatoes.
It's a staff issue too.
FEMA just got decimated, so who knows who's even working on this anymore, if anybody. So that's why we're. Okay, 3.2%.
Randy, any more
No, it sounds like we
questions for staff?
touched on just about everything and if we don't have a lot here leeway, we do have to go with an increase. I don't know how the rest of the board's gonna feel about it.
Well, Scott's saying, as he so eloquently reminded us, it was, a minimum of 3.1. Now, the more sit and listen, I'm thinking maybe we should go 4 at least. That only gets us another less than 100,000, 90,000. So it put us at 320 or something like that. The fees to do the increase are $1 a ratepayer. So it's not, 15,000, but that's $1 a ratepayer. So that's one thought, as you said, well, why, let's just do it at once next year and not do it this year and save the 13,000. But it's really a trivial amount when it gets down to the per ratepayer. So anyway, I think we're, I don't think we're in trouble this year and probably not next year, but 3, 4, 5 years from now, I can see where we're going to have potentially a big problem. You would think with as much rain as we had the last 2 years, any kind of collection system washout disaster past us. There was so much water moving.
We can hope. I think the Ventura River here probably hold us for a number of years, wouldn't you say?
Foster Park?
I'm more worried about.
Not Foster Park, the previous one.
It's kind of tough. It's a braided river, and there's a professor at UCSB that looks into it. But, depending on what builds up in the middle, the sides of the river change direction. So if you look at where the trail damage was, it was going right along that bluff there along the trail, and then all of a sudden it hit something, a grove of trees in the middle because they don't maintain it, and it 90-degreed right into the trail and into the hillside.
But now we've got those 5 and 10 ton rocks there.
400 feet of 10 miles of river.
Okay. That's where the island was that turned the river.
That time, yeah.
That hasn't moved.
We weren't allowed to move the.
Changes to the river since we've done that repair in that location and immediately downstream.
Yeah, I guess every time there's water in it, something
Yeah.
changes.
Yeah.
Geologically, it is grinding east.
Those are kind of the great unknowns, the things that we can look though and wonder what condition is our steep piping? You know, so we don't have another break like Burnham Road. I mean, we would not have expected that the day before it happened.
It was on the CIP list, but it was not next in line. It was
So
after that. So
if
There's
there's
still
some,
more lining to be done.
it's in millions of dollars in our CIP. Yeah, programs.
we're only doing much next year.
Go about 1 to 2 months per year of collection systems.
What's the most you could do if you had unlimited? Just if you're staffing.
Let's double it because you could grow your project size.
Contracted, it's not like our staff is doing the lining.
Still have staff and.
Design and specs, but I think we could at least double the project area and probably get one done at a time.
See, that's
Which would be a
the,
good long-term investment.
that's the disaster I don't want to have happen that we could potentially control. River, it's going to do what it does, but if we've got line that we know potential for a problem, we could have taken care of it at double the rate that we are, then maybe we should take care of it double the rate we are. You know, just to avoid scenario that Scott's worried about is the 5 point some odd disaster scenario. We could have potentially offset if we'd spent another $1 million the year before.
Wasn't Creek Road soon?
Now we're hoping to, this next fiscal, we're gonna finish the Burnham trunk downstream of the siphon. And, Kunkel Creek area, which is a priority due to the location.
Where's that?
Oakview, where all the Apricot, Olive, Bundren, Mountain View streets dead end into the creek there. We have a line in the middle of the creek. There's a manhole that has flow rushing around it every time it rains.
Spills trouble.
So we have a lot of easements. We have a lot of easements that haven't been rehabilitated or improved since they went in.
It's paper,
That's, sorry, what?
it's paperwork.
It's,
Rehabilitating easements,
well, it's like
construction.
difficult to access or cost per foot, just based on access.
To replace a line.
We've been prioritizing rehab to get the footage. More lining than you can bursting dollar.
So you came up with the 1.5 million or whatever for this year. How was that determined versus double that rate?
Some of anticipated projects that we'll actually do with our workload. I think it's 1.4.
You could do twice that, is what you said, right?
I think we,
Is this based on budgetary restrictions?
it's already, always, since I've worked here 8 years, it's always been, we've budgeted around $1 million for collection system and we've spent around $1 million for collection system. So what we could get done and how we might prioritize like some longer term projects that have been sitting out there that would be multi-year funding. No, that's kind of something we have to work with.
Well, let me ask another question. If, let's just say that we in our collective wisdom said, we'd like you to double the pace. So it's already April. So practically, if you were going to double the pace for next year's budget, could you even do that? What's the earliest you could start on the second half, if you will?
It's kind of tough because those projects get funded in the middle of the change of the fiscal year. So I don't know how that works, but we're, I would say, baked in for this summer and fall. Summer and fall collection system projects that we anticipate doing in the next 2 to 3 years are shorter on the design and prep phase. We anticipate doing CIPP rehab of our trunk sewer along Creek Road.
So I think what you're telling me practically, if we wanted to double the spend rate, earliest you could actually physically get started on that would probably be June of 26, right?
We'd hopefully be going out to bid because it's a larger project. We'd be going out to bid in spring today.
8 months from today.
You would start your design as soon as you could.
So we
Yeah, you'd be
start
starting design, you know, for, yeah, ASAP.
go into next year's budget by the time you actually went out for design.
Halfway through.
So we practically So we might spend a little more than 415, 25, 26 budget, the 26, 27.
Instead, yeah.
Yeah, we'd probably try to jump on it earlier because our projects take about a month now, month to 2 months. For our major project in construction, plus a month lead up of the middle. And I'm not the expert on how it gets funded exactly because it splits the fiscal year. So that always is, I'm glad that Alice takes care of that.
I get, what I'm just getting, I'm trying to get out of when would we need to fund you and when could you practically use the money? So it sounds like we need to be told that we wanted to double the pace for 26, 27. We need to tell you that early January 26.
Do design, yeah,
So you would be funding it in this budget we're talking about if you wanted construction in the subsequent year, because you'd be designing at some point in this next fiscal year.
But we could budget the design, but not necessarily the work. That's what I'm getting at.
Work would be 26, 27.
This 25, 26 would actually include the design work, which would be several $100,000. Would go into the 26, 27 budget.
Construction go in 26, 27.
And then at that time, assuming FEMA comes in, then we'd be right at 7 million reserve at the beginning of the 26, 27 budget. Potentially isn't enough to do this kind of stuff. I mean, we could do a lot of it, but not much, and still have a reserve for the disaster scenario. With the idea in mind, we're limiting our disaster scenario somewhat. But anyway, I'm just going through my mind what this all falls back to in terms of a rate increase.
I have one more question about the numbers. You said the CPI was 3.1. What was the CCI?
I don't.
4.2.
4.2.
4.2. It's a little bit over 4.
Yeah.
It's about 1% higher or a little bit more, yeah.
I think we got to do
FEMA
it.
money.
But we definitely need the FEMA money just so that we don't have to,
So we can stay
so
breaking.
we don't have to worry about another disaster. But I'm,
Going on it anytime soon, it doesn't sound like.
It's-
Process.
since the CCI money, since the CCI is what really drives our expenses, I'd be more comfortable rate increase that parallels the CCI or CPI.
Something.
Just say round number 4%.
Okay with
The district isn't buying groceries or paying a mortgage. You buy gas, but
that
that
district. People who pay the district are buying groceries and buying gas.
I agree, but I'm trying to figure out what does the district need to operate?
Right. Okay, I see, yeah.
I think 4% is better target. 4.2.
Well, 3.1 not be enough. 4.2 may be too much. I don't know. What sort of a decision are you looking for from this committee to recommend to the full board?
So one of the,
It's coming
yeah, the,
weeks from now.
right. What I'm looking for is for some weigh in on what is your comfort on what reserve shall the district really maintain? That becomes the question, right? So there's two things that we don't know. We don't know if we're gonna get FEMA and how much, and we don't know what the fine is and how much. And the only thing that's gonna, we have no control over those. But philosophically, we have to be somewhat comfortable with how much do we need to have in reserves? That's,
We're comfortable 5 years ago.
yes, right.
But we knew that money was spent.
But that was TMDL was a big chunk of that, sure.
We knew where that was going and you had to have that reserve.
Now it's reserves for we don't know what.
What did we have in reserve prior to started saving money for that plan? I would have to.
So I did go back and I think I have some data that goes back about 15 years and it was running around 20 million bucks.
Even prior to the plan.
Yes. And I'm happy to present that. I was thinking about bringing that, but I didn't want it to.
Does that include like the 15 here? Is that everything or is that just accessible?
I think it's everything.
We'd want to know just the accessible, right, to really make a.
I'm happy to pull that up.
I'm thinking, I remember it being around 22 or 23 million.
For everything.
Everything, yeah. All of this stuff, plus another 8 million.
Yeah.
Say,
When I first started, we were, as I recall for everything, we were around 25. What I remember, that's 2020. I know it wasn't 30 and I know it wasn't, I think it was around 2025. 25 is what I remember. And so if we were saying 14 of that was for the plant, then we were around roughly, which is kind of where we are now.
I think the sense of the committee is we need a rate increase. And somewhere probably between the 3.1, 4% at least.
I'm with you on the 4%. I think that was,
I believe so too.
I think the committee would be comfortable with 4% as a recommendation to the full board.
Sure.
And where would you like the excess revenue to be put into the reserves to balance the budget? So any excess revenue would be posted to an additional contribution to one of the reserves.
Probably the stabilization.
You know, after the conversation with who's here on the lines and all that, we're gonna have money put somewhere. I would put it in that collection
I
system.
would agree with you only because if you look at it, there's $1.4 million worth of projects and there's not sufficient funding currently in there to do next year's projects. So you're already not going to
In fact,
achieve.
that 278 million or whatever the number, 200 would be,
It's out at 8,000.
would easily go there. I don't know, does it say where it's going?
No. Well, that's his option, but
So it'll be whatever is in addition to that. So you can pick multiple places. Based on the proposal, I mean, you will have next close to zero in your collection system by the end of the fiscal year.
if we have 278 discretionary, could go to the line fixing problem. Is that a good way to describe it?
Election system,
Money left over from this year.
replacement reserve.
That also could go to that election system reserve. Then
One of those was about 1.4 million and one was 4 million.
and so the other thing, that rate stabilization fund's there to stabilize rates. So if we need to use some of that money with somewhere to offset the need for a rate increase, that's what it's for. And so transferring that money next year, if we discover we need to, into the election system or wherever else, there's 678,000 there. I wouldn't use it all in 1 year, but using it over. Anyway, I mean, there's lots of ways to play this, but the net of it is we need $5 or $6 more million from somewhere. 3 of it may be FEMA, but not.
Yeah, for sure.
Which kind of flies in the face of everything I was fussing about last year over the budget. Last year, it was just presented as it feels right. Having a discussion about why it feels right would have been helpful for me. Anyway, I think,
Feel better about discussion this year so far.
yeah,
Yes, Liz.
Just gonna say, so we'll deplete our collection system reserve. The projects anticipated. And then we are making a contribution in theory with a 4% rating, well, possibly a small. Status quo has been $1 million per year.
78 that we have available, that could go there.
Yeah.
We have leftover money from this year, say, let's just say 300.
Sure.
So you'd end up with a incremental 578 roughly. Then we could take some from the rate stabilization.
Okay.
Give you another couple $100,000
To make it a limp.
if we
another
needed.
year.
Yeah, so you could, and then we get money coming in from the rate increase.
Checking, because for status,
And we can pull on it, but my sense of it is our biggest risk right now is the collection system. If you can do something to get wherever we think we might have problems fixed sooner, then that's a good thing in my mind. If there's something we can do to, if there's sections of pipe we just don't know what it's like, we can get those surveyed. That to me that's very good insurance in my mind.
And in many ways, we have new treatment plant. We've been through this project. Yeah, we got belt press problems, we've got biosolid things that'll cost us something as we go. But the big pieces should last us a while. They're brand new.
just the filters.
The filters are brand new.
Just the filters are brand new, okay. But
But we get, yes, we are,
well, just the filters didn't cost us $1 million either.
You're 8 million.
Just
surprise.
Then we built the remaining filters with new filter components.
that was 8 million.
But who's counting?
Okay. We still got old ditches and stuff like that.
The big concern is the old
There's,
changes happen.
Fire.
And unfortunately also, the 90s upgrade, concrete has alkali silica reaction occurring, which is causing degradation of our concrete structures. At a
You're
more
saying
rapid rate.
sides of the ditches are falling in?
One, yes.
more breaking apart, but yes.
Let's make it of Kevlar next time.
Can't line those, can we?
There's some rehabs that you can do, but it's well way into the 7, if not 8 figures, probably for a ditch that's. I would hope 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
We agreed on recommending 4% to the board
Yeah, it sounds like it. That would be,
and any problems that fall off the table, including the 4%, go to the collection system. Would say that's our recommendation. Okay. 5:53. We're adjourned.